if you don't know me already, my name is Hillary Black, and I am a conversation designer. I'm also a marketer, and I host an online community of mostly conversation designers or people hoping to break into the industry that is called Conversation Designers Internet Club. I also have a job board that is called conversationdesignerjobs.com. And that sort of is what inspired me to bring Lauren in for this conversation. I think that with the way that the conversational AI field is right now, there's a lot of roles that maybe people haven't heard about, or they just don't know, like, what the heck do you do in a day? So I think it's just interesting to introduce people to these new career paths, and to hear how you can break into a job, whether it is in product, whether it is consulting. And so based on our poll, most 50% of people are trying to break into the field now. So that's very interesting, that you're either trying to break into the field as a conversation designer or as something else. So I just am very excited to introduce you to Lauren, and I will let her introduce herself and share a little bit about what brings her here today.
Sure, sounds good. First of all, thank you so much, Hillary, for having me on. Love talking to people about careers because I think also my own journey was so obscure at the beginning. I really had no idea I would end up where I am today when I first started, but very happy to be here. So I guess maybe a quick intro. Name's Lauren Goerz. I am a product evangelist at Rasa. So if anyone's wondering what on earth that is for a Silicon Valley kind of title, a product evangelist, the word evangelism actually means to spread the good news. So I like to think of myself kind of like a conversational AI hype woman. So I'm very much here just to kind of spread the good news about, what conversational AI can do, and specifically what you can do with Rasa, a conversational AI vendor. So that's a quick overview kind of my title, and very much within the Rasa organization. So on the product side, I very much work within the product marketing team. So I think a part of evangelism to some extent is very much tied in with product marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And once someone had called me a conversation design evangelist. And so I feel like
Nice.
the context for everyone here who does know me, you kind of just know me as a person who, yeah, is like the hype person for conversation design. So I think that it's just like such a cool job to have. And I think even your background in AI consulting is also like dream job for a lot of people. So I feel like you really have had such an interesting story that I am excited to get into. And I think for people to just kind of have a better general understanding of what it is that you're hyping up, if you
Sure.
want to just give us a little introduction to what Rasa is, what people build there, how they could get started with Rasa if they were interested in pursuing the platform.
Sure. Let me just share my screen real quick. All right, so this is going to be a rapid fire intro to Rasa because I think what's important here is not to be a marketing pitch. It should be
Yeah.
about careers. But if you're interested, Rasa is very much a conversational AI company, and we're one of many vendors that are existing in the field. But I think one of the things that's interesting about us is that we are an open source vendor. So we have a really strong kind of root in the open source community. Over 25 million people have downloaded us since we first launched in 2016. And we are, again, like I mentioned, a startup. So we're kind of spread all across the world. Got some people in San Francisco, lots in Germany. We've got some people in the UK and Edinburgh. And as you can see, we've actually gotten a chance to work with a ton of really big companies, which I think is for us really exciting and kind of validated the approach that we have in conversational AI.
Yeah,
And
it
feel
is
free to interrupt me with
interesting
any
that,
questions.
yeah, it's interesting that Rasa is like a startup because, yeah, you are very, reputable in the field. And I think especially being in the open source community, that's something that is very, very different from all of the other vendors that are out there too.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, a major shout out to all of the people that have worked in the Rasa developer relationship team. I think they've done such a mega job just kind of, again, evangelizing almost the developer side of Rasa and what you can do with Rasa open source as a product. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what Rasa open source is and how that fits in with Rasa enterprise, which is kind of maybe more relevant even for the conversation design community. But real quick, I guess maybe a question would be why would I choose Rasa? I think especially, looking at Rasa from the outside in, it can look quite technical. And that I think really is coming. We're kind of going through a shift as a company as we're moving from, a very much developer only company to becoming an enterprise company that really, is kind of fully understanding that actually, all conversational AI teams are multidisciplinary, and there are many people who are not developers that are absolutely necessary for these projects. So I think the question then still remains, why Rasa? And I think one thing, since it's open source, that basically allows you to keep control of all of your data on premise, how you like it, doesn't have to exist in the cloud. I think, again, because it's open source, you have massive flexibility, which kind of really allows, again, from the developer side to some extent, people to go in and create custom connectors to pretty much whatever you want to connect with. And that really allows for a kind of deep kind of customization. So I think for scale, again, Rasa is pretty good. Another thing I think that's important is the open source kind of machine learning dialogue management. So for the people that are working in conversational AI, Rasa actually has dialogue management system that works quite a bit differently from some of the other vendors that are on the market. So a lot of vendors, I'm thinking IBM, Dialogflow, maybe Cognigy Core AI to some extent, they also they work with something that's called a state machine. So that's a conditional way of managing dialogue. Whereas Rasa kind of took it almost a step further and said, hey, the same way that in a sense, a similar way that we work with intents, we feed a system examples and allow it to classify it and kind of tag things with what it expects to be, the user's utterance. We do the same thing actually for the dialogue management side itself. And we feed our system, or allow you to feed the system, Rasa Core with example dialogues, and using machine learning, the system actually guesses the next best action. So if you're kind of more of a veteran in the conversational AI sense, you might understand, wow, that's actually quite different than maybe kind of the status quo for how dialogue has been managed in the past. So that's kind of, I think, again, why you have this kind of startup vibe in our company, because we're really trying to push the limits in the research category and move conversational AI beyond just a state machine. And I think the last thing, again, if you're working with Rasa, because it's an open system and we have so many amazing community members that contribute to us regularly, you're really able to kind of actually make adjustments within our system itself, either on your own with the help of other community members, or whoever's within your project. And I think that's something that makes us really different from other vendors, because sometimes, I don't know, let's say you have a system that's not classifying entities correctly. You might have to wait 6 months until that vendor decides to fix that problem. And especially, I work in Germany, so this happens often with languages that are not English. It's oftentimes that the system doesn't work perfectly, and it takes a long time to actually get those changes. And again, that's another good reason to work with an open source company, because if you don't like something, you can change it. So that's a good piece.
Yeah, and that's super important. And I also think the community aspect of all of that, and like how passionate people are about it, and just how a lot of product companies in our space, they either are for communities, or they are kind of just like behind a curtain, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, or you don't have visibility into those types of decisions. So I do find that very interesting.
Exactly that. We like to think of Rasa as kind of white box AI as opposed to black box AI, where you don't actually
Yeah.
know what the algorithm is behind that's producing, how your classifier classifies intents, for example. So that's something that's really transparent in Rasa. So maybe, again, more exciting for kind of the conversation design group is kind of how we split this out. So Rasa open source is very much kind of this infrastructure layer that helps us manage dialogue flows with machine learning. It includes NLU pipelines and the different ways that you can classify things. But of course, that's existing very much for access for most developers, right? But then on top of that, we have Rasa Enterprise, which is to some extent a combination of enhanced infrastructure and a UI layer that allows people to actually make changes and update and build dialogue within Rasa Enterprise. So, for example, you want to add another intent, you could do that in Rasa Enterprise without actually having to go into the code and do it, that way. But that's the cool thing about Rasa, is you can keep it both ways. If you want to work at the code level, you can, or you could also work more in the UI level and do it that way.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I do think that, especially for the Conversation Design Institute folks who are here, being in that sort of AI training world, or wanting to know more about that, you may already be aware of Rasa, or it's something that you should look into learning, just because it's something that you're going to have a lot more flexibility, and you're going to find a lot more people to collaborate with, which I think is super important, especially as you're trying to sort of break into the industry too.
Cool. So just to kind of give you an idea, here's just a really basic overview of what a Rasa team might look like. And I think you can see, again, a lot of people in the call here, on the far right, sitting in the kind of UX designer, AI trainer role. But typically Rasa projects have at a minimum, a product owner, manager, probably also a lead developer. And, and this, because we do have some machine learning components to our product, that can be super helpful to have someone that understands how those pieces are working and can optimize those pieces. I think it's also super helpful to have a backend engineer that can handle all of your API integrations. But again, these two roles are often existing with many other vendors. And the same thing again with UX designers. Also, no matter how easy the interface is that you're using, you often still have UX designers that are designing out customer journeys and looking at things from a customer perspective. So I think what we're moving forward to and really starting to focus on in kind of the next generation of our Rasa Enterprise platform is to kind of really make things a lot easier for the folks on the far right here, the UX designer and AI trainer. So I'd say stay tuned, everyone. I think one of our missions at Rasa is to make great assistants easy to build. And we've done a really good job making them easy to build for developers. But I think in the future, we want to make them also easy to build for all of the different multidisciplinary roles that exist out there in conversational AI.
Yeah, and especially as sort of the teams get more I guess traditional in the way that they're structured, that now we do have all of these people on every team, whereas in the beginning we kind of only had developers and everything was sort of designed and built by developers. And now conversation designers have definitely entered the market and being a much more important part of the team. And so I think that I'm very excited to see sort of what you all do and how it evolves.
Yeah, so stay tuned. And I think maybe a good way to stay tuned is also to have a look at our Rasa community. So I just wanted to highlight that here. I would say definitely within this forum are also an incredible group of developers. But what I wanted to highlight here, especially for this group, is within this community, we actually have a section called jobs. And sometimes every so often, you will see people posting, different job opportunities around projects. And while many of them again are, they're looking for Rasa developers, I think it's also worth asking these people, hey, especially if you're looking for, just experience and maybe you're willing to offer your services just for free as people are working on educational projects or startup projects. I think this would be a great place for you to have a look and kind of just start communicating with people that are working on these type of projects. There are so many incredible NGO projects that are being, that are using Rasa that I think could absolutely benefit from your community members' expertise, Hillary, if you want to get involved in that direction as well. So I think it's a good way to kind of build out your portfolio if you got involved there.
Yeah, and being like that part of it, especially the portfolio, and people trying to get experience, this is the number one thing that I think is the biggest mystery to people who are trying to break into conversation design is how do I get experience when I don't have experience? And how can you sort of find these volunteer projects or like internship type of projects, and just contribute to them so that you have these real examples and you're working with real developers. You're not working with a no code platform. You're working with something that actually works and it is a lot more sophisticated. And I think just introducing yourself to that community is something I definitely recommend for people, especially as you're just starting out. And as I said, 50% of the people here are trying to break into the field. So this is a very, very good starting point. And I dropped the link to join the community into the chat. So I definitely would encourage you to do that and to just kind of like poke around and see if there's anything interesting to you. Maybe reach out to some people individually and just say, hey, I would love to, help you out on your project with conversation design. If they don't know what conversation design is yet, you can sort of let them know that it is something that can just improve the UX of their experiences. And I think that they would be more than happy to have that help.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is going to be the best place to find people that are happy to have, free help because a lot of them are, again, working on very minimal budgets in this community or they're doing it nonprofit. So great place to look.
Yeah, for sure. And great place to kind of get that experience. And so I think like speaking of all of this experience, I would love to sort of dive into your background. Obviously, from all the things that you've been saying so far, like, of course, you have this sort of technical background, but I know that you also have a consulting background. And so I would love for you to just share kind of how you initially discovered conversational AI, because being that right now it's a newish field, like you're someone who has been in it for quite a long time. And so how did you sort of, I guess, discover it and find your first role in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to start kind of back at the very beginning, just so you can see how far the journey was to here.
Yeah.
So I think, Hillary, we share something in that. I think we were both English majors. Do I have that correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. So I was an English major at the University of Virginia, English language, linguistics, literature, all of those topics, very much involved. I pretty much read books for 4 years and I loved it. So I
Which
think,
I read books
yeah.
for 4 years and I hated it. So
Okay.
we don't share that. But yeah, English majors. And I see Sarah in the chat also is an English
Nice.
major as well.
Yeah. And I think I did a minor in French as well. And a lot of the classes that I took were also quite linguistic, I would say. Of course, not computer linguistics, totally two separate topics, I know. But I think I was always really interested in the way that language works across different languages, et cetera. And so that kind of is just to give you an idea of why I was interested in really working in this industry. So the idea of making computers talk ultimately for me was just fascinating, to kind of
Mhm.
bring that out was, yeah, always interesting to me. But of course I didn't know about it when I was an English major. I had no
Yeah.
idea this whole industry existed. In fact, recommendation to universities is get those digital humanities degrees going, because most of the English majors that I know were like me, did a lot of paper writing and book analysis without much practical kind of applications. So I think that's what I was really missing. So I moved abroad, had a quarter life crisis, moved abroad, moved to England, did my master's in business because I was hoping that that piece of paper would give me access to business roles. And it did. So I was really lucky there. Got a business degree, and at the University of Durham in England. And that kind of allowed me to start applying to different business positions. I really wasn't that specific. I just knew I didn't want to necessarily be a teacher or a lawyer, which are kind of the classic roles that English majors take on after they graduate. Even though they're great
Mhm.
roles, just knew they weren't for me. So I actually applied to an internship at IBM in Germany because I knew I wanted to stay abroad. I was really interested in staying abroad and continuing my international experience. And shockingly, I got accepted. And that was also something that was really big. So I moved to Germany and started interning at IBM, where I actually worked for a sales account. Now, within the sales account, we had IBM Watson was kind of new. So anyone who knows IBM Watson, it's one of the conversational AI vendors. They have a chatbot system called Watson Assistant. And one of the sales representatives within my team, she was in charge of cognitive sales, so Watson sales. And I don't know, I think everyone still had to learn exactly what that was. So being the intern, perfect job for me to step in and kind of learn what conversational AI was so that we could start selling it to clients. So I did a lot of YouTubing, tutorials, pretty much YouTube my way through this whole gig. And what was cool is because I finally got a little bit of experience and learned how to build within that system, I ended up starting doing POCs and demos for clients. So if you're in a sales organization, you get a lot of people that contact you. And of course, no one's going to say no to a free proof of concept. So
Yeah.
I had a lot of POCs that landed on my desk. And pretty much that was my introduction to both conversation design and implementation simultaneously. And both of those skills transitioned well into my future role where I was at IBM before I was at Rasa, where I was working as a conversational AI, really an AI consultant, but with special focus or emphasis on conversational AI. So that's a
Yeah.
long story
So
short in where I ended up. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that, like I said, I feel like AI consultant is something, and working in consulting in general is something that people are very interested in. And I would love to hear, sort of, aside from the, building and deploying these proof of concepts, which is like crazy that you were doing all of that on your own, also as an intern. That's just like a lot to be learning on the job. But I mean, obviously, internships, that's like the perfect place to learn. So I would love to know, kind of, once you were full time as a consultant, like
Mhm.
what was that like? Like what was your day to day like? I'm sure every day was sort of different, but how did you kind of find that job? Because that's something that I'm sure a lot of designers would love to be, but don't really know like what's included in that. What qualifications do you need? What types of problems are you hoping to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, just to start, there almost every major consultancy has some kind of specialist department in conversational AI. You might not know about it, but it exists. And it's sometimes hard to find the jobs there, but I think it's worth the digging, because I think you'll find, Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, Microsoft, Dialogflow, even on the vendor side, there are often consultancy roles for implementation. So there are many jobs in the AI consultant department that have conversational AI focus. And I think for me, I think that was the cool part that I really liked, and also helped kind of escalate my learning curve to some extent, because when you work as a consultant, you can wear many hats. So I feel very much I developed into what I would describe as a master of none, but I got a lot of really good experience, because
Yeah.
when you're an AI consultant, you can do, of course, what I just talked about. You can do a lot of building POCs, so kind of advising clients on possible use cases that might work for conversational AI. I always love this part, just talking to people and brainstorming about what kind of problems you can solve with conversational AI, and then building out a little demo for them within whatever tool that you're using. So that's one piece of it. But oftentimes, a lot of it looks like project work. And so this is kind of it can either be, I worked in the context of a lot of different projects. Sometimes I was working on supporting the test team, so building out test cases for conversational AI. Sometimes I worked as a conversation designer, so quite literally just teaching the client how to map out dialogue flows, and sometimes also teaching them how to build it also in the tool, because that's something I think that a lot of times the conversation design community seems to quite separate from, is the implementation piece. But I think it's actually quite possible, especially with a lot of tooling that exists out there, for the conversation designers to get quite involved in implementation if you're interested as well. I think there's a big demand actually for someone that can do both. And again,
Yeah,
doesn't
there
always require
is.
coding.
Yeah, there is a big demand for people
Yeah.
who can do both. I think especially in smaller organizations, they kind of need that extra help. But yeah, I always say to people, if you're interested, you should absolutely try doing that. If you're interested in the technical piece of it, and if you're not, that's okay too. But it's definitely you can be a lot more competitive of a candidate, I think, if you can do both.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's maybe also like why, if you're interested in kind of doing both, AI consultancy might be actually perfect for you, because that's a place where you definitely get to do both if you want to. And I think the last piece that's kind of interesting with AI consultancy that I really liked as well is you get oftentimes the opportunity to kind of be like a project lead. And that's really exciting over time once you get enough experience. And that's kind of the person that sits beside the product owner in a conversational AI project, as on the consultancy side, and helps manage all of the different resources, and kind of works with the project owner to kind of manage the whole project. Because most product owners, a lot of times conversational AI is totally new for them. They've not worked with it before, or they're just domain experts, right? They might own the call center that you're working, to adding a conversational AI bot to. And so I think that is a really fun space to kind of work with a domain expert, but bring in your own expertise and kind of lead a team. So I think that's kind of, for me, that was kind of the crux, or the peak of my consulting experience that I had while I was there. And I think maybe the last role that you could have is analyst. And this is kind of quite a common one in consultancy. And this is most useful when you have project at scale, but an analyst will do a lot of let's say transcription reading and looking for opportunities where you can actually improve the bot. So that does, I think, also require a bit of conversation design experience, because you need to be able to read through and understand, okay, where did it go wrong? And then come up with ideas for actually how you have to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like the strategy piece of it, which I also find is kind of where conversation design can cross over into all these other roles, is if you really understand strategy and you really understand why these decisions are being made outside of just like, is the language perfectly correct? That's where you can kind of go into these other aspects of the field.
Yeah. And then maybe
So
also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, so why did you sort of want to go more towards the technical side when you
Mhm.
had this like business degree and like
Yeah.
obviously English degree too? But business, like consulting obviously is a very big part of business, but it
Mhm.
seems as if like even your experience in AI consulting was a lot more technical based. So was that something that you
Mm.
sort of just grew an interest in through doing it?
Yeah, I think I wanted both, because I like to think so. Of course, like within a project, I play sports, right? So I've always been in teams, and I really like the opportunity to work with different people, even the opportunity to lead teams. But I think I've also been a coach as well. I love coaching. And I think if you're going to be a good coach in let's say a sports team, right, it really helps when you have experience actually doing the job itself. You know what I mean? It's hard to coach a sport that you haven't ever done yourself. Not that you can't
Hmm.
do it, but it's harder. And so I think the same about careers in conversational AI. If you ever want to kind of move towards different leadership opportunities, it really helps if you've actually had experience, doing the technical pieces. And of course, just background again, I'm not a developer. I'm definitely not. But through the process of learning how to implement, of course, I figured out how to get on Stack Overflow and find out things about JavaScript if I needed to change something in my chatbot. You know what I mean? So I'm very much like a reactive technical person. I can figure out things if I need to, but I don't have a background as a developer. But I think that I tried to soak in as many technical pieces as I possibly could, because it helps me now, especially now that I'm on the product side, understand what's required. What are the requirements for users using our products? And the more
Yeah.
technical knowledge you have, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that that's very encouraging for people, is that even if you don't have the skills to be a developer or know how to fully implement a solution, there are so many resources out there, from, tutorials to YouTube to everything, and even like looking at the documentation, just to kind of figure out how to solve the immediate problems that you have versus, building an entire thing.
Got it. Can I answer a
Um,
question? I just see someone asked, as a consultant in
yeah.
conversation design, should I learn Python and other programming languages? That's a good question. So I would say probably for me, the first, and I can't say that I'm great at Python yet. I would love to be one day. I think it's a work in progress there. But I think one of the most important things is kind of just being able to edit it. And I think especially, it sounds like you're already in a project, or you're already consultant. So that's the coolest opportunity. I think it's much harder to learn how to do things when you don't have practical places to practice. But if you're
Hmm.
already in there, like, get involved, because I think for me, just being able to edit things, already increased my knowledge. And for me, it was enough with the product that I was using. But I think with, a product like Rasa, I'm actually still learning as well. The more Python the better. Helps you write custom actions. I think it's absolutely a powerful tool to have in your, bucket, but it depends on what you want to do with it.
Yeah, and that could be the sort of thing where if you have sort of a book, or if you have, helpful tutorials that you are always kind of leaning on, you can dig in there and like fix the things that you need to fix, and then not worry about, do I have to have every single piece of knowledge about Python? Starting out, I would say like in the beginning, probably not. Like, don't drop every single thing in your life to like go take a boot camp. Kind of keep
Yeah,
going and doing what you're doing, and then figure it out as you're going along.
absolutely. You can learn so much about coding from conversational AI. You just have to dig around a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess, speaking of like, developer frameworks and Python, etc. So when you were at IBM, like, aside from their own tools, were there other sort of like design tools that you were using, or other, I guess, like favorites that you have from your time as a conversation designer slash
Yep.
etc.?
Yeah, so this could be very old school. I actually don't know, because I realized when I was working at IBM, I was very much in a bubble. I kind of only realized all of these communities exist after I left, actually, and joined
Yeah.
Rasa. So pretty much all of the projects I ever worked on, we built out designs in Draw.io or Visio. And
Hmm.
they were like massive. You could wallpaper the side of a barn with them, kind of dialogue flows. So
Yeah.
I think those are, I don't know, are those still relevant today? Do people still use those?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
So those are both things that people still use. I think the biggest sort of changes are what I'm sure you experienced, and what I did too. Like, starting out using Draw.io, is that it's very hard to manage like those huge,
Mm,
huge like sheets, and those huge, huge drawings, and every single change you make has to be made in like 100 different places, and it's very easy to get out of date. So I think now the tools are kind of trying to be more in the way
mm,
of like being easily updated, being more easy to manage, and more easy to kind of just like go in, change things, and have it be collaborative, versus
mm.
like Draw.io, especially. I'm not sure about Visio. Like, I have heard of it, but I haven't used it. They're static. And so once you make
Yeah.
a change, you have to like resend it to everyone, reprint it all, as opposed to like having
Yep.
those like commenting features right within the tools. That's kind of like the biggest change, and how far they go down the line. So can you actually deploy things from like a voice flow or something like that? You
Mhm.
know, a lot of times you can integrate it with other frameworks like Dialogflow or Rasa, or it can be like a fully no code type of platform that's being used as a design tool. But then there's even, you know, Figma and things like that, which are
Ah,
very
yeah.
more traditional, I think, more traditionally design focused platforms.
Yeah.
So it's all, you know, there's not really standards to anything. It's not as simple as kind of like, here's what everyone uses, but I think we're kind of getting, you know, closer. Yeah, and someone said they use something like Miro. So yeah, I think it's a lot of just personal preference, honestly.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. I'm now that I'm kind of getting the chance to delve more into the community, I'm really excited to learn about what tools people are actually using, because of course that helps me on the product side understand, you know, what kind of people are we building for? What kind of tools are they using? So I'm super excited to hear what you all are using. As opposed
Yeah.
to him.
Well, and I guess like speaking of that, so what made you want to sort of shift
Mm.
and go from consulting to more of a product role? So obviously, like product is in your title, you know, it's a product
Yeah.
role. It's not necessarily building product, but I'm very curious to hear like what kind of inspired you to make that shift.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I mean, first of all, huge shout out to my IBM colleagues. Like I learned so much from IBM and all the people, great bunch of smart people. But when you're on, I think, especially in consulting, it can get sometimes quite repetitive over time. So you end up doing the same implementation, the same, you know, end up reading 1,000 transcript entries every single day and annotating them. And sometimes it just gets really, really repetitive. And also after all of this, you start to sometimes get frustrated with the tools that you're using and you want to make them better. So I think that's
Yeah.
kind of, for me, was a cool transition to product, and seeing also a company. I think one of the things I really liked about Rasa is how much they were on the educational side of things and really just getting out there and educating people about the industry and connecting with people. And that's something that I wanted to do,
Mhm.
because when you're in industry, there were days when I realized I'd actually spoken to a robot more than I'd spoken to a real person. And that's that's wild. So I think that's what's
Yeah.
cool about product is I get to have conversations all day, every day, do webinars, talk with people in the community, hear about their problems, think about ways to make things better. And that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is your typical day as a product
Cool.
evangelist? Even
Yeah,
less typical than as a
yeah.
consultant?
Yeah, definitely less typical. I would say there's much less rhythm, but there are some things that stay the same. And I'm ultimately, I'm still learning as well as I'm going through this process, right? I don't have a, you know, 10-year experience in product marketing. That's something new for me.
Yeah.
But I think as I see it, and that's also the cool thing about working in startups, is because, you know, not necessarily, you know, you don't necessarily have a 100-person team of experts that can tell you what to do. So you kind of get to figure things out on your own. But I think within product marketing, I work a lot on launches. So that's anytime there's a new product that's coming, or we make a major change, or we have a new release. Probably a lot of the communication that you're seeing from Rasa is coming from me. So that's a lot of release blog posts. It's a lot of forum post drafting. It's a lot of naming, thinking about the different ways that we name things, and that kind of thing. So all of the messaging components, you know, are a really big piece, I think, of product marketing and evangelism to some extent as well, is ultimately messaging. Right. So that's where I think, again, going back even to that like English degree, you need to be a good writer. I think that's something, not that I'm a
Yeah.
great writer, but I'm learning more and more how important that ability to write impactfully is. So I think that's a
Yeah.
big thing. And then the other side of my job is very much more with product. And that's the part I actually really inspires me a lot. I also like writing, don't worry, but I think especially as Roz is kind of going through an enterprise transformation, and we're starting to build not only for developers, but for, you know, conversation designers and the like, domain experts. We're doing a lot of, you know, I get to work with the user experience research team. So they're constantly having conversations with people about, you know, what they need from tools, and listening from them and getting feedback, and kind of just trying to almost give feedback to our product team about what I see in the market, so that what they build is relevant for users. So of course we get a lot of feedback from our customers, right? But
Hmm.
you know, they also have they're also living in their own ecosystems and their own bubbles. So it's also important to really bring in market feedback into our product design. And so that's a big piece of what I do as well. So I'm really close with the product team at Rasa, working with our product managers, and just helping them wherever I can in order to kind of drive and direct, what the future of the product looks like. So they ultimately have the final say what it looks like, but I at least get to give feedback, and that's a really cool piece.
Yeah, so it's almost like you have had to develop sort of like a product eye so that you can recognize, like, out in the market, what are people doing? What are the things that people are wanting that maybe they don't know that they want yet? Or what are things that are happening that people are talking about that is or isn't a part of your product already? And how can you translate that into something that's actionable versus just an opinion? This is something that is researched, and this is something that is said by more than, I guess, just like one person, right?
Yeah, you said it better yourself. Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what other, aside from like the writing and I guess
Mhm.
sort of, it's almost like product passion, I guess I would say. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily like direct product experience. It's just kind of
Yeah.
like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to like improve this product the most. Like, what are other skills that people should
Mm.
learn if they are interested in sort of going this route in their like future career or now?
Yeah. I think also having sales experience can be super helpful, just because a lot of and it depends on the company you're at. I would say at the moment, I don't necessarily have a lot of customer contact. It could change for me in the
Hmm.
future. Many product evangelists have a ton of customer contact because they're kind of an interesting person within the company, because most product evangelists don't actually have a quota. And so that
Yeah.
means you can talk to them, and they're not necessarily, they're not just there to make a sale at all costs. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
can give you kind
Yeah.
of a realistic opinion about your questions. So I think that's also, well, of course, sometimes sales quotas can be nice if you do well, but on the flip side, it's also nice to kind of not have that influence how you talk to people, and what, what your opinion is on the market and what's useful for them.
Yeah,
So I
and
think
like
that's a
how
piece
much
that can be
time you
helpful.
spend with them too, because it's sort of
Also
like
that.
if all you're trying to do is make a sale, you might be more willing to just kind of let a conversation go that isn't going to be, fruitful for
Exactly.
you. But that's sort of a lot of times the people who are telling you no are kind of the people that you want to be talking to, because they're the people
Exactly.
who aren't finding what they want to find in your product. So understanding the why of that, and it's almost like, I think in conversation design, like, we have a lot of responsibility in terms of like being curious about why things aren't working out, and not necessarily accepting like every single answer as it is, or as this is the way it has to be. Like, it's all sort of figuring things out just with language versus trying to figure things out and see where does the product fit into this. So it's such an interesting place to have that like product influence versus just having the like user influence, which is something that,
Mhm.
conversation designers like care the most about.
Yeah. So, and I think there's a lot of roles in product too. I mean, in
Hmm.
addition to product managers, I mean, there's many different roles within product marketing as a function alone that could be useful for someone that wants to get into product that has some experience with conversational AI. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of vendors out there, so there should be also a
Yeah.
lot of roles in product in that direction.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And even like product marketing, period. Like, product marketing is something that is very important, or considering if there is a particular like conversational AI platform that you're very passionate about, like, do they have
Yeah.
jobs? I think there's a lot of creativity that you can kind of find in your job search, that it might not be as simple as, I want to be a conversation designer. It could be a number of different things. And I think that that's very interesting. And we're at kind of like a very interesting point in this industry where it's really exploding in terms of the amount of roles that exist on like any given team at any type of
Mm,
company.
yeah.
So from, I guess, sort of like jumping back to the consulting
Mm,
part a little bit,
mhm.
like,
Yeah.
if people are hoping to move in that direction, like, what are sort of the skills that they might need, or
Mm,
even just like, I guess because it's kind of like a more obscure thing to be a consultant,
yeah.
because it means a lot of different things. But it's like, what are, I guess, avenues that a person should explore in terms of skills, or like places they should go to learn in order to pursue that sort of field?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll put this in the context of like conversational AI consulting, I guess, just because that's the
Yeah,
space I
yeah,
know the
yeah.
best. But I think, for
Mhm.
example, in almost every conversational AI project is an agile project. And I know that's a buzzword, but there are conversational AI scrum masters, they are, agile practitioners. And so I think if you're interested kind of in kind of classic consulting and project management to some extent, getting experience with Scrum and Agile can be really helpful also when you bring that into a conversational AI project. So I think that's something that if you don't have, massive technical experience and no desire to have that, you could really make a big impact on a conversational AI project with those kind of skills. I know there's a ton of different trainings for
Yeah.
Scrum, et cetera. So I think Scrum, et cetera, that's very specific, but you get the gist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the sort of thing too, where if you're not sure like what these things are, just kind of going to YouTube or going to Google and kind of searching different, project management systems, or searching Scrum or searching Agile, and just seeing like the way that people are describing these, are these things that I'm interested in. Are these things that I could picture myself learning and doing? And once you kind of know that you have that interest, you can learn the skills, because it is, especially with that, it's like there's certifications and you are certified, and that's something that makes you employable in that specific thing. But if it's not something that's interesting to you, then maybe that's not the best route for you to be going down.
Yeah. And I think there's also like, if you're just interested in the general field of like computational linguistics, or, if you like chatbots, you might also like search systems, you know what I mean? Which is kind of a version of how computers interpret language. So I think there's a lot of parallel kind of industries where you could work as a Scrum Master and do quite well with the knowledge that you have in conversational AI. So I think that's also something to consider there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like related to this other question someone had asked, is like, so I know your, initial experience was in building voice assistants with Watson, and now like Rasa is able to power basically any type of chatbot, anything, custom solutions, WhatsApp, whatever. Do you find that there is really like a big difference between knowing each of those interfaces? And obviously, like your experience right now is a bit different in terms of your involvement in actually like building on the interface. But and this is a question that I get a lot too, is like, should people focus on like one specific interface in order to like have the best chance of getting a role in conversational AI, or is it kind of good to have an understanding of all of them?
Yeah. So I think I took the route of understanding a lot of them, you know what I mean? But that's just kind of came to me through the course of working as a consultant. There are also people that, this is kind of another parallel industry you work. There are agencies that are also hiring conversation designers. And for example, I worked, when I was on a project, I think I worked with an agency called VUI agency and Lautmaler. These are both German agencies that just do voice conversation design. So they're specialists. I would say when you're taking maybe the approach of working with smaller companies, you might be expected then, however, to know all of them. But I think it's also cool it's a cool understanding to build up to learn about more of them. Because I think even if you specialize in one, it helps you understand the whole ecosystem. I think about voice, right? There are less textual design affordances in voice. So it's really, for me, one of the purest forms of conversational AI, because you can't have buttons easily. You can't display a carousel. You can't log in with another interface in a new tab. So I think understanding how it's different can also be quite powerful. But I would say a lot of people separate between text and voice if you're in the or at least that's what I've seen from designers. There are voice designers and there are text designers, and some dabble in both. But if you're going to specialize, it's less specialized by channel than it is by kind of mode. Mode is more
I think so. It's like either it's voice first, or it is chat on all channels, or it is multimodal, which is both. And like I consider, well, I am a specialist, and I mean, I feel like I've said this so many times where I'm like, I don't design for voice. Like I never have. I have like done a few projects like on my own, but it's not something that I have professionally done. And that's sort of just like a personal preference. And I think that as people enter into the industry, even as you're like taking these courses, or like I said, like my course is only for chatbots, it's not for voice, but I know that other courses have just for voice. And I think people, it's very easy for people to uncover which they are more passionate about. And then it's sort of just understanding the principles. Like, sure, I understand the principles of voice, but it's just not something that I enjoy